Spain once held the world in its fists, not as a metaphor, but as a living reality that shaped entire continents. Long before Britain claimed the title of the empire on which the sun never sets, it was Spain that commanded oceans, dictated trade, and controlled a global web stretching from Europe to Africa, from the Pacific to the Atlantic, from the frozen Andes to the jungles of the Philippines. In the 16th century, one crown sat at the center of the world's first true global empire. And yet, beneath the gold, beneath the glory, beneath the magnificent facade of power, something was quietly rotting. The paradox that destroyed Spain is the same paradox that threatens modern economies today. The illusion of sudden riches. Because when Spain stumbled into the New World in 1492 and discovered mines that seemed bottomless, it felt like destiny had handed them infinite wealth. Gold and silver, in quantities no European kingdom had ever imagined, poured into their treasury. After the conquest of Mexico in 1521, the Aztec Empire collapsed, and Spain seized access to the silver veins of A decade later, the Inca Empire fell, and the legendary mountain of Potosi, the mountain that eats men, became a conveyor belt of treasure, feeding galleons for more than a century. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain imported 180,000 tons of silver and 2,000 tons of gold. More silver than Europe had mined in 1,000 years. This wasn't wealth. This was an economic nuclear weapon detonating inside Europe. Spanish bullion reshaped the world. Ships from Seville and Cadiz transported silver east across the Mediterranean, north to the Low Countries, and west across the Pacific to Manila, where Chinese merchants traded silk and porcelain for literal mountains of Spanish silver. It was the birth of the global economy. And shockingly, while Jamestown was a muddy swamp clinging to survival in 1607, Mexican and Peruvian cities already had universities, printing presses, and stone cathedrals that rivaled Europe's. Spain was so far ahead it looked untouchable, but history has a cruel rule. Anything that rises too fast collapses even faster. Spain confused treasure with wealth, and this single mistake triggered an economic implosion that destroyed the mightiest empire on earth. Prices exploded. Inflation devoured wages. Between 1500 and 1600, prices in Spain quadrupled, the first major global inflation event in history, now known as the price revolution. Bread, clothing, tools. Everything became unaffordable for ordinary people. Money flooded the economy, but production didn't. Imagine a village where bread costs 1 coin, and overnight 10 times more coins appear, but there's still the same number of bakers and the same number of loaves. Bread doesn't get better, coins get weaker. Spain poisoned itself with silver. Elites who touched the bullion first became richer. The common people, living on fixed wages, sank into misery. The more silver Spain shipped home, the poorer the Spanish became. And still the silver kept coming. Still, the illusion grew. Still, the empire swelled. But behind the illusion was a fatal structural weakness. Spain didn't invest in its own economy. Instead of building industries, Spain bought everything from others. Italian merchants, Dutch traders, German craftsmen. Spanish money made everyone rich, except Spain. Rivals reinvested every coin they touched. Spain waited for the next treasure fleet like an addict, waiting for the next hit. But the worst mistake wasn't inflation. It wasn't imports, it wasn't decay. It was debt. Catastrophic, imperial, civilization-killing debt. Spain began borrowing against silver that hadn't even arrived yet. German banking dynasties like the Fuggers and Genoese financiers loaned the crown enormous sums backed by treasures still sailing across deadly oceans. It worked only if the silver arrived, if a ship sunk, if a storm struck, if pirates attacked Spain, and Spain defaulted not once, but 4 times, in 50 years. 1557, 1575, 1596, 1607. The richest empire on earth was going bankrupt every 2 decades, and into this fragile system sailed the wolves of the sea pirates. Not the Hollywood kind, but state-sponsored economic weapons. Francis Drake, backed by Queen Elizabeth, plundered Spanish galleons and returned to England with treasure worth half the crown's income. Dutch privateer Piat captured an entire treasure fleet in 1628. A single blow that ripped a hole in Spain's financial system. Every treasure fleet was a lifeline. Losing one was like a modern nation losing all its reserves overnight. England and the Netherlands stole Spanish silver and used it to build banks, navies, and trade companies, the foundations of future empires. Spain's lifeblood became its rival's fuel. The empire was bleeding from every direction. Inflation at home, imports draining wealth, pirates at sea, bankers demanding repayment, kings burning silver on endless wars. Spain saw itself as the sword of Catholicism after the Reformation, and this holy mission devoured silver like fire devours oxygen. Wars against the Ottomans, wars against France, wars against the Dutch, wars that fed the 30 Years' War, the most expensive conflict Europe had ever seen. The Spanish Armada of 1588, built with American treasure, sank not only in the sea, but in financial shockwaves. And as all this happened, Spain's industries died, its productivity withered, its peasants starved. Its rivals grew. England built colonies that produced value: tobacco, sugar, cotton, not treasure. The Dutch founded the world's first stock exchange and created a merchant empire built on trade, not plunder. These nations reinvested Spanish silver into systems that multiplied wealth. Spain burned it into smoke. That is why Spain collapsed, not because it lacked gold, but because it drowned in it. It built no systems. It built no industries. It built no self-sustaining engine of wealth. It extracted. By the 1600s, Spain still looked powerful on maps. But maps lie. Inflation had hollowed out its prosperity. Pirates had shattered its credit. Debt chained it to foreign bankers. Treasure fleets, its greatest strength, became its greatest weakness. The empire that once terrified Europe was now a giant made of glass. And here is the brutal lesson. Treasure is not wealth. Money's not strength. Silver is not power. Real wealth comes from systems that produce value, from industries that multiply productivity, from institutions that survive shocks. Spain learned this too late. Today, nations make the same mistake, flooding economies with money, borrowing against the future, confusing financial illusion for real prosperity. The pirates of the 1600s have modern equivalents. One bank collapse, one market shock, one financial hit can unravel entire systems built on confidence. History doesn't repeat, but it whispers warnings. Spain had everything except discipline. Everything except investment. Everything except the one thing that matters. A system that can survive without treasure. The empire that owned half the world collapsed because it believed wealth was something you dig out of the ground, not something you build. The question for us today is simple. Are we any different? If this changed the way you see history, you're watching System X. And this is only the beginning. But the story doesn't end with Spain, because every empire, every economy, every generation eventually faces the same temptation, the illusion that wealth can be printed, mined, or borrowed into existence. Spain learned it through silver. Modern nations are learning it through debt. Today, the treasure fleets are gone, but the pipelines of easy money haven't stopped. Governments issue bonds, the way Spain shipped galleons. Central banks pump liquidity, the way Potosi pumped silver. And investors, just like Spanish creditors centuries ago, buy into the belief that the next shipment will always arrive on time. But history is whispering a warning. No endless stream is ever truly endless. Look closely, and the patterns feel familiar. When an empire becomes addicted to inflows it didn't earn, whether that's bullion, credit, or printed currency, discipline evaporates. Spending explodes. Industries shrink. Innovation slows. The nation becomes a consumer instead of a creator. Spain spent its silver on wars, luxuries, and foreign imports. Today, countries spend borrowed money on stimulus checks, trillion-dollar budgets, and interest payments on old debt. Spain mortgaged its future to pay for its present. Modern economies are doing the same on a scale Spain could never imagine. And then comes the most dangerous phase: denial. Spain insisted the silver would save them. The crown promised the mines would last forever. Politicians reassured citizens that everything is under control, until the day it wasn't. Inflation ate the wages of Spaniards, the same way modern inflation eats the wages of families today. Prices soared, while leaders blamed merchants, weather, wars, anything except their own decisions. The empire kept pushing the narrative of strength long after the foundation had cracked. When reality finally broke through, it was already too late. If this sounds familiar, it should, because our world is far more interconnected and far more fragile than Spain's ever was. Today, a single bank failure, a sudden credit freeze, a supply chain shock, or a geopolitical conflict can send ripples across the globe in seconds. The treasure fleets of the 1600s may be gone, but the vulnerability remains. Every empire in history believed its wealth would last forever. None of them were right. But here's the difference. You and I have something Spain never had. Hindsight, we can see the pattern. We can learn from it. Spain shows us that true power never comes from what you extract. It comes from what you build. Not from silver, but from systems. Not from treasure, but from productivity. Not from inflated wealth, but from real value. That's why the nations that last are the ones that invest in innovation, education, industry, and discipline. The ones that don't become chapters in history books. You're watching System X, where we dig into the forces that shaped history and the forces shaping your future right now. If this changed the way you see modern wealth, modern power, or the illusion of money, make sure you subscribe, because the next episode, it might just reveal the flaw hiding at the core of today's global economy, the flaw no one wants to talk about.